When coaching clients, the very first part of our process is to find out the client's core values. Sometimes the client already knows them, but sometimes it takes a little bit more time, questioning, values tests, and other techniques to excavate the values that drive the client. This may seem like an unnecessary use of time for people who just want quick results right now, but the underlying reason that most people come to coaching is to build a happier, more fulfilling life. And understanding their core values is building the foundations to make this happen, especially for the long term. If we were to skip the values identification part of this process, we may be able to set and move towards goals quicker, but what will happen is that the client will either find themselves lacking the motivation to stick with the goals, or if they are actually able to reach these goals, the fulfillment they find can be fleeting, and they're often left asking themselves what actually happened. Like reaching a mirage of an oasis in the desert. That nourishment that clearly appeared there a second ago has vanished into the same sand that you've been trekking through this whole time. And so taking the time to get to know and understand your core values, that empowers all areas of your journey. Your long-term vision becomes one that you can place some more trust in. You're better equipped to make decisions at the challenging crossroads that will inevitably come up. And walking the journey itself becomes more fulfilling. We'll look at how to work out our own values today. But first it's worth looking at where our values actually come from. Welcome to Redlily Radio. Radio. Have you ever heard the phrase, "You are the sum of the 5 most important people in your life"? This is a wise phrase for getting another perspective on who we are. And it's true, partly, but it's not just the 5 closest people to us. It's a wide range of sources that influence what end up becoming our values. If we look at the social sources, it's our parents or the other people who raised us. It's our friends and our peers. It's our workplace, our school, and the people who surround us in those places. And it's our interactions with the wider public in general. The influence that comes from structured societies that we are part of is places like our religious community, or our sports community, or our arts community, or any other community that we're part of. It comes from academic institutions and their policies. And it comes from the law of our country or the state that we're in, depending on how much that we identify with it. It doesn't just come from direct contact with people though. This influence can come through all forms of media as well, especially when we're repeatedly exposed to it. So for example, stories, movies, TV shows, video games. And if we're looking at history, the oral tradition of storytelling orally was used to pass down values. Also, songs, music, poetry, and other art that can give us certain feelings about certain topics can shape our values. Advertising as well can have an effect. And some of the strongest value influences on us come from our own memories of past experiences, but especially how we interpret or frame those experiences. Now, this is not to say that we have no choice in our values. We definitely do. But to choose our values, we must first recognize the ones that have already been shaped within us. If we're focusing on the external forces that have this influence on our values, it's the combination of the people, the structured societies, and the media, and those in particular come together to what we call culture, which is something that often seems to slip out of any one single definition that we try to put it in. We generally have an instinctual understanding of what culture is, but one good way to get a better understanding of what it is to compare your own culture with another one in a non-judging way. As it happens, often we take things for granted as just the way that things are, or the values that we believe to be true and positive for everyone aren't always so. I have a friend from China, Qian, who moved to Australia a few years ago. She has found a great love for Australia, but she still loves her homeland just as much. Because of this, she's found a passion in doing a variety of work that helps bridge the cultural divides that can sometimes be a little overwhelming for international travellers who move here. And as well as for the locals already here, who can feel a little bit puzzled by the behaviour of some of the people coming from abroad. She is currently working at the Kaplan Business School and spends a lot of her time talking with international students, which has informed one of the latest articles on a blog about the main difference between Chinese culture and Australian culture. Qian writes, and I quote, "Initially, I feel very surprised when strangers greeted me on the street with a smile. 'Hi, how are you?' One of my friends from Nepal shared a similar feeling with me. When she arrived here, her housemate came to talk to her on the first day. She thought, oh, she must have mistaken me for someone else. Later on, she realized that, no, this is actually just the way that people show their friendliness here." Unquote. Qian talks about how Australia's history as a small nation residing on a large isolated continent has developed a community culture which is cooperative and inclusive. Recent Australian history is interweaved with peoples from many cultural backgrounds, often coming here for a fresh start to get away from the strict class systems in their own countries of origin, and this creates a desire for a more level playing field here. Qian discusses how Australians will say things like, "thank you," "please," and "sorry" a lot, whereas in China she says, and quote, "we like to put love and appreciation in our hearts without showing them by words," end quote. The appreciation is assumed rather than needing to be articulated with words. She goes on to talk about the same patterns in how physically affectionate we can be in Australia. Some of her early encounters, including lots of hugging and in one case a kiss on the cheek, the kind of crossing of physical space which would be highly uncomfortable in Chinese culture. Another key example she explores is the difference between the Chinese values of collectivism, more of a group focus, and how they contrast with the more individualistic culture that we have in Australia. This means that many people from China and many other Eastern countries, they value their group, their community, or their society very, very highly, sometimes higher than themselves. Whereas in Australia, our individualist culture leads to a lot of value being placed on doing what is right for you as the individual. This is the cultural difference that leads to people saying things, for example, support your family first versus follow your passion first. As a personal example, I remember speaking with a friend a few years ago whose family was from Vietnam. She was telling me about the pressure of choosing a career which would enable her to send money back to her extended family. Just do what's right for you, I would tell her, trying to console her at the time, but unfortunately I was only seeing things through my own individualistic lens, through my own culture. The beauty of studying psychology and coaching since then is that it's taught me that many of these things aren't so black and white. It's important that we recognize the diversity of values that people may hold and understand our own values. As personal or life coaches, we are trained in this. This way we can make sure that we're not unconsciously trying to put our own values onto the client, but rather we're facilitating a growing direction and lifestyle which is rooted in their values. But this is also just a great understanding for anyone to have, especially as our world is becoming more cross-cultured and more integrated. So we've talked a lot about what our values are and where they may come from and the power they have in our lives. And with your appetite now hopefully whetted, you may be asking, so how do I find my values? How do I find out what they are? Well, there are a number of different ways to do it, and today I'll share one. This one we call microscoping values. What you do with this technique is to get a piece of paper or type on your computer or whatever works for you, and you start by writing in one sentence something that you want. Don't worry about how deep or shallow it is yet. That's what this technique is for. Choose something you want. So, for example, someone might say, I want a mansion. Okay, we've got that first one. Then what we do is underneath that, write the question, what will that bring? Then you answer this question. Okay, I want a mansion. And what will that bring? Well, it will mean that I have my own place that I can host huge parties at, and everyone will talk about how great my parties are. Now, just like a microscope, where you can keep zooming in closer and closer, we want to keep zooming in to what the real value is that is driving our desire here. And we do that by asking our microscoping question again. Alright, I want to host huge parties that everyone loves. But what will that bring? Well, if everyone loves my parties, then they will keep coming back. Okay, and what will that bring? You might find it starts getting a little harder the deeper you go, but this is just because we're starting to explore uncharted territory in ourselves. Well, if people keep coming back to my parties, it means that I will always have people around. And what will always having people around bring? It means I always get to be social. And what does always being social bring? Well, being social energizes me and it makes me feel happy. You can keep going as deep as you want and see what you find. But generally around this point when we start hitting core feelings, we're getting a fairly clear image, one of this person's core values. In this case, being social. Being social. Now, do you remember what that first desire was? I want a mansion. If we hadn't done all the work to excavate that core value of being social behind this sentiment, this person may have put in all the time and energy into acquiring a mansion without making sure that their social needs were actually met. And this would most likely end up with them feeling the same, if not worse, than they do now. By knowing their core value of being social now, we can actually start to ask, is there a better way to meet this value? Perhaps joining a regular community group would give this person all the fulfillment that they're actually looking for, instead of having to go for the whole mansion. The microscoping values technique is something that you can try yourself for a range of different desires. The values you find, keep them in mind as you're making decisions about your future. And in time, reflect on whether these values that you found are working for you. With experience, reflection, or using other techniques too, you will start to know your core values with a greater clarity. As you discover your values and practice rooting your decisions in them, simply keep your eyes, your mind, and your heart open to the difference that it might be making in your everyday, and excitingly, to the difference that your values can make in your long-term journey. Now, it's important to us that the techniques that we use in coaching and share on this podcast actually reflect real-world results. And so we would love to hear about your experiences with Redlily Radio or any results that you found by trying out these techniques. You can contact us and let us know how you go at contact@redlilycoaching.com. Redlily Radio is produced as part of Redlily Coaching, where we leverage one-on-one coaching, technologies, and this podcast to help grow your personal direction and empower your life in our increasingly technological world. For more information, visit www.redlilycoaching.com.